My cousin snatched the will and shouted, "He changed it at the last minute. This doesn't count." My mother whispered, "Then why did she leave a video message?" My uncle went pale. "A video?" The lawyer nodded. She wanted to make sure there was no confusion about her final decision. The screen turned on, and my grandmother smiled. "If you're watching this, it means I finally got the last word. I never thought my family would turn into one of those inheritance horror stories you read about online. But here we are." My grandmother, Maria Alvarez, was the backbone of our family. She grew up dirt poor in Queens, worked 3 jobs to support her kids, and managed to build a stable life. She wasn't rich, but she was smart. She saved, invested, and made sure her children had everything she never did. She had 2 kids, my mom and my Uncle Martin. My mom was the responsible one, the one who stayed close, helped with bills, and took care of grandma when she got sick. My uncle? Not so much. He was the golden child until he wasn't. He burned through his money, made bad choices, and had to be bailed out more times than I can count. Then there was Victor, my uncle's son. Victor was born with an ego bigger than his brain. He grew up spoiled, treated my grandmother like an ATM, and barely spoke to her unless he wanted something. He was the kind of guy who bragged about buying designer clothes but owed people money left and right. When my grandmother got sick, my uncle and Victor started hovering. At first, it was little things, asking about her finances, pushing to help with paperwork. Then it got worse. They started questioning my mom about the will, dropping hints that grandma should reconsider things. She didn't. And that's where this whole mess started. For years, my grandmother had a simple will. The house would go to my mom. She earned it. Her savings would be split between my mom and uncle. Victor and I would get small inheritances. It was fair. My mom was the one who took care of grandma, handled doctor's appointments, and paid for things when my uncle flaked. My uncle had already gotten way more help over the years than he deserved, but grandma still made sure he got something. Victor, though, he didn't deserve a damn thing, but she still left him something to be fair. That should have been the end of it. But greed makes people stupid. A few months before she passed, my grandmother called me. "Victor keeps asking weird questions," she said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He asked if I wanted to reconsider my will," she said. I told him no. That made my stomach turn. "Reconsider how?" I asked. She sighed. "He said maybe the house should go to the next generation. That maybe my son should decide what's best." Translation: he wanted my uncle to get everything so he could eventually inherit it. I told her to be careful. She laughed it off. "I already took care of it," she said. At the time, I didn't know what she meant. When grandma passed, things got weird. My uncle and Victor suddenly wanted to handle everything. They insisted on planning the funeral. They kept my mom away from the house, saying they were sorting her belongings. They refused to let my mom see any paperwork. My mom was grieving, so she didn't fight them. But something felt off. Victor, who had barely spoken to grandma before she died, suddenly acted like the world's most devoted grandson. He went on and on about how much he loved her, how close they were, how much she wanted him to have a good life. It was disgusting. Then came the lawyer's meeting. That's when everything blew up. We were all sitting in the lawyer's office, me, my mom, my uncle, and Victor. The lawyer opened the file, pulled out the will, and before he could even speak, Victor snatched it from his hands. "This isn't the real one," he said immediately. I stared at him. "What?" He waved the papers like they were trash. "She changed this at the last minute. This doesn't count." My uncle nodded. "Yeah, we have the real will." The lawyer looked unfazed. "You do?" Victor smirked. "Yeah. Grandma signed a new one with us a week before she passed." I felt my mom tense next to me. I clenched my fists. A week before she passed, my grandmother could barely speak. There was no way she signed anything. Then my mom, calm as ever, said, "Then why did she leave a video message?" My uncle's face went white. Victor's mouth opened, then shut. The lawyer adjusted his tie. "Yes. Maria wanted to make sure there was no confusion about her final decision." He pulled out a laptop and pressed play. And there she was. Grandma appeared on screen, sitting in her favorite chair. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," she said. "And if Martin and Victor are throwing a tantrum, it means they tried something shady." Victor's entire body stiffened. She continued, "Let me be very clear. I did not change my will at the last minute. But I did change it 6 months ago." The lawyer slid an envelope across the table. "This is the legally notarized version, signed before witnesses." Victor shot up. "This is..." Grandma cut him off. "If Martin or Victor try to claim I made a new will with them, they are lying. And if they try to contest this, I left instructions for an investigation." I looked at Victor. He looked like he was going to pass out. Grandma leaned forward on the screen. I also left a copy with my lawyer, my doctor, and my neighbor, who was very good with cameras. Victor made a weird choking noise. "Nice try, boys," she grinned. The video ended. Silence. Then my uncle exploded. My uncle slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't fair." Victor grabbed the will. "This has to be fake." The lawyer sighed. "It's not." Victor turned to my mom, rage in his eyes. "You did this. You manipulated her." I saw my mom's hands shake, but she kept her voice steady. "She did this herself." Victor wasn't listening. He pointed a finger at the lawyer. "We're suing." The lawyer smiled. "You can try." Then he pulled out another folder. "And when you do, We'll introduce the security footage from Maria's house. My heart nearly stopped. Victor froze. What footage? The lawyer opened the folder. The footage of you and Martin sneaking into her office 3 weeks before she died. I saw Victor's hands start to shake, and that's when I knew they were screwed. Victor's face turned a deep shade of red. My uncle's hands gripped the table so hard his knuckles went white. They were cornered, and they knew it. But of course, men like them don't go down without a fight. Victor let out a dry laugh. Security footage? Yeah, right. You expect us to believe that. The lawyer was completely unfazed. Believe whatever you want, he said, flipping through the folder. But the footage exists, and it will hold up in court. Victor turned to my uncle, looking for backup, but my uncle was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. He knew it was over. But Victor? Victor was still desperate. The lawyer packed up his files, signaling that the meeting was over. My mom and I stood to leave, but Victor wasn't done. As we walked to the door, he muttered, "This isn't over." I ignored him. My mom ignored him. The lawyer definitely ignored him. That was our first mistake. Because the next morning, we woke up to absolute chaos. At around 6 a.m., my mom's phone rang. It was Grandma's neighbor. "You need to get here. Now." We rushed to Grandma's house, and the second we pulled up, my stomach dropped. The front door was wide open. Inside, the place was a disaster. Drawers were pulled out. Papers were scattered across the floor. Furniture was flipped over. It looked like a robbery, except nothing valuable was missing. They weren't looking for jewelry. They were looking for proof. My mom's face went pale. Victor. I knew she was right. This had his name all over it. Then the neighbor stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I have footage." And just like that, Victor had screwed himself again. The footage was painfully clear. At 3 a.m., Victor and my uncle had broken into Grandma's house. They were on camera rifling through documents, tossing aside books, even ripping open couch cushions like they expected to find some hidden safe. And then, the best part, Victor, standing in the middle of the living room, fist clenched, screaming, "Where is it?" I almost laughed. They thought they could steal back control. Instead, they gave us exactly what we needed to bury them. We took the footage straight to the police. Breaking and entering. Trespassing. Tampering with legal documents. It didn't take long before they brought Victor and my uncle in for questioning. And that's when things took a turn I didn't see coming. The police gave Victor and my uncle a choice. Work together and go down together. One of them could flip. And guess what? My uncle, Mr. Family Loyalty, Mr. Blood is thicker than water, didn't even hesitate. He flipped immediately. "I had nothing to do with this," he said. Victor planned the whole thing. Victor looked like someone had slapped him across the face. What? But my uncle wasn't done. I told him to leave it alone. My uncle continued. I told him we lost fair and square, but he wouldn't listen. He broke in. He searched the house. I was just trying to stop him. I nearly choked on my own laughter. This was the same man who, a day ago, had been screaming that the will was fake. Now he was pretending to be the responsible one? Victor lost it. "You lying snake." But it didn't matter. My uncle had turned on him. Victor was officially alone. And that's when he cracked. I should have known Victor wouldn't go down without one last pathetic attempt to save himself. Because the next day, he called my mom. She didn't answer. Then he called me. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. And the second I picked up, he went into full manipulation mode. "You don't understand," he said, his voice shaking. "Your mom is the bad guy here." I blinked. "What?" "I overheard her and Grandma talking before she died," he said. "Grandma wanted to change the will. Your mom convinced her not to." I stared at the phone in disbelief. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You're saying my dying grandmother told you, someone she barely spoke to, that she wanted to change the will, and my mom forced her not to?" "Yes," he said quickly. "That's exactly what happened." I started laughing. "Dude," I said, "do you have any idea how desperate you sound?" Victor stammered. I'm just telling the truth. Right? I said. "Just like when you said you had the real will? Or when you said the video was fake? Or when you broke into the house to look for God knows what?" He was silent. So I ended the call with 6 words. "Enjoy your legal fees, you idiot." And then I hung up. For the first time in months, my mom and I felt like we could breathe. The law was on our side. The evidence was stacked against Victor and my uncle. Grandma's final wishes were safe. But something told me Victor wasn't done. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. A week passed. My mom and I were exhausted but relieved. The lawyer was handling everything, and it felt like we had finally won. Then, out of nowhere, Victor vanished. I don't mean he just stopped calling or posting online. He was gone. No one had seen him. He wasn't at home. His phone was off. Even his girlfriend, who never stopped whining on Facebook about her perfect man, posted, "If anyone knows where Victor is, please tell me. I'm worried." At first, I thought maybe he had just skipped town to avoid the mess. But then, one night, we heard the footsteps. It was past midnight. My mom had gone to bed, and I was up watching TV when I heard a rustling outside. At first, I ignored it. Probably a raccoon. Then I heard footsteps. I muted the TV. The sound was clear now. Someone was moving through our backyard. Slow. Careful. I grabbed my phone, crept to the window, and peered outside. And there, Half hidden behind the bushes was a tall figure, standing way too still, watching our house. I swallowed hard. My first thought was that it was a burglar. Then, my stomach dropped. Victor. I backed away from the window and immediately called the police. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. But when we checked the backyard, we found something worse. In the dirt, right outside my mom's bedroom window, were deep footprints. And in the center, a crumpled, stained envelope. The second I saw it, I knew. Grandma's handwriting. I picked it up with shaky hands, turned it over, and felt ice in my veins. Written across the front, in her usual neat cursive, were the words, "To be opened only if something happens to me." My mom gasped when she saw it. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. A letter my grandmother had written before she died. And what it said changed everything. The letter was short but brutal. "If you are reading this, it means something went wrong. I need you to know Martin and Victor have been trying to manipulate me for months. I have caught them snooping through my things. They've been pressuring me about the will. I don't trust them. If they fight my final wishes, do not give in. They will lie. They will cheat. They might even try to take things by force. I wouldn't put it past them. Stay strong. They are snakes. Love, Grandma." I sat down, my hands shaking. Grandma knew. She saw this coming before any of us did. And somehow, Victor had found this letter and tried to use it to, what? Scare us? Warn us? Confess? I had no idea. But I knew one thing for sure. Victor wasn't done. 2 days later, my mom got a call. She put it on speaker. "Mrs. Alvarez?" The voice on the other end said. "Yes," my mom answered cautiously. "This is Officer Daniels with the NYPD. We need you to come down to the station regarding an urgent matter involving Victor." My heart stopped. My mom's face went pale. "Is he okay?" The officer hesitated. "He was in an accident. He listed you as an emergency contact." I knew, immediately, something was wrong. Victor? Listing my mom, the woman he hated, as his emergency contact? Bull. I grabbed my mom's arm. "Ask which precinct." She did. The line went silent. Then a click. They hung up. It was a scam. Victor had pretended to be a cop to lure my mom out of the house. And I had a sick feeling about why. At this point, we weren't just scared, we were furious. Victor had tried to fake a new will, break into Grandma's house, stalk us in the middle of the night, and now he was pulling fake emergency calls. Enough was enough. We took everything, the letter, the phone call logs, the backyard footage, even Victor's ridiculous fake will attempt, and went straight to our lawyer. "I want a restraining order," my mom said. The lawyer nodded. I was just about to suggest that. Within 48 hours, the order was granted. If Victor came near us, near Grandma's house, or even tried to contact us, he'd be arrested on the spot. And that's when he snapped. The very next night, my mom and I were home, finally feeling like we could relax, when bang. A loud crash shook the front door. We jumped up. I grabbed my phone. My mom gasped. Then, bang, bang, bang. Someone was pounding on the door. And then, a voice, Victor's voice, screamed, "You think you can do this to me? You think this is over?" I froze. My mom looked at me, terrified. Victor was outside our house. And he was losing his mind. I called 911 so fast my fingers fumbled on the screen. "He's here," I whispered to the operator. "Victor. He's banging on our door. He's screaming." "Stay inside," she said immediately. "Lock all doors. Officers are on the way." Meanwhile, Victor was still outside, raging. "I know what you did," he yelled. "I know you manipulated her. You think you're safe?" His voice cracked. He sounded deranged. Then came the worst part. He started throwing things. Bam. A rock hit the window. Crash. Another hit the mailbox. I heard glass shatter. He broke something. Then sirens. Victor didn't even try to run. The second the police pulled up, he just stood there, seething, fist clenched, chest rising and falling like a wild animal. The cops jumped out. Hands where we can see them. Victor laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. Then, as if he had planned this moment his whole life, he held up his hands and smiled. I will never forget what he said next. "I was just stopping by to say goodbye." Then he let them cuff him. And just like that, Victor was finally done. Even after Victor was taken away, something gnawed at me. This didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a distraction. And I had the sickening feeling that we were missing something big. Victor was finally arrested, and for the first time in months, my mom and I felt like we could breathe. But something still felt wrong. The way he had just stood there, hands up, smiling, that wasn't the reaction of a man who had lost. That was the reaction of a man who still had a card left to play. And I was about to find out exactly what that card was. A week later, we got a call from the lawyer. "There's a problem," he said. "I need you both to come in." Immediately. I didn't like the sound of that. When we got there, the lawyer looked exhausted. He ran a hand over his face, exhaled, then pushed a document across the table. "You need to see this." I grabbed the paper and scanned it. Then my blood ran cold. It was another will, dated a month before Grandma died. And in this version, Victor got everything. I slammed the paper down. "This is fake." The lawyer nodded. "Obviously. But it looks real," my mom whispered, staring at the signature. "How?" The lawyer sighed. "Victor had a backup plan. He must have forged this before she passed, knowing the real will might be used against him." I clenched my fists. So what does this mean? The lawyer's face darkened. It means they're trying to contest the original will in court. I wanted to scream. Victor was in jail, and he was still trying to steal from us. We had no choice but to fight. Weeks later, we found ourselves in a packed courtroom. Victor sat at the defendant's table, looking smug despite the handcuffs. My uncle wasn't sitting with him. After flipping on his own son, he had wisely decided to stay far, far away. The judge called order. Then came the bombshell. Your Honor, Victor's lawyer said, standing. We have a witness who can confirm that Maria Alvarez intended to leave her estate to Victor. I nearly laughed. Who? The doors opened, and in walked Grandma's nurse. My mom gasped. I turned, heart pounding, watching as Nurse Helen, the woman who had cared for my grandmother in her final weeks, walked up to the stand. I had trusted her. She had been kind, gentle. She had held my grandmother's hand when she was too weak to sit up. And now she was testifying for Victor. I felt sick. The lawyer began questioning her. Miss Helen, can you confirm that Maria Alvarez expressed a desire to change her will? She nodded, eyes downcast. Yes, she said softly. She told me she wanted Victor to inherit everything. My mom gripped my arm. She's lying. I gritted my teeth. I know. Then came the moment that changed everything. Just as I thought we were doomed, our lawyer stood. We have new evidence, Your Honor. Victor's smirk wavered. The judge nodded. Proceed. Our lawyer turned to the bailiff, who rolled in a television. Then he hit play, and Grandma's face filled the screen. Not the first video, a new one. Victor's jaw dropped. And then, Grandma began to speak. If you're watching this, it means Victor is trying to steal from me. The room went silent. I had a feeling he wouldn't stop. So I made this, just in case. Victor's hands curled into fists. I want to make one thing clear. My final will, the one with my lawyer, is the only real version. I did not change it. If anyone presents a different one, it is a forgery. The judge leaned forward. Victor turned white. Then, the final nail in the coffin. I also want to thank my nurse, Helen, for her kindness, Grandma said, smiling directly into the camera. But if she ever says I told her I wanted to change my will, she's lying. I watched Helen's soul leave her body. Victor slammed his hands on the table. She's lying. The judge banged the gavel. Enough. Then, he turned to the bailiff. Take Mr. Alvarez into custody for fraud. Victor screamed. It was over. For real, this time. Victor was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Helen lost her nursing license and was fined for perjury. My uncle disappeared, probably out of shame, probably to avoid Victor's rage. And my mom? She finally got the house. It took months for everything to settle. But one day, as we stood in Grandma's garden, my mom exhaled and said, she got the last word. And damn, was she right. Grandma had outplayed them from the grave. Looking back, I wish I could say I was surprised. But the truth is, people like Victor don't change. They don't feel guilt. They don't feel shame. They just keep taking until someone stops them. And Grandma? She made damn sure she was the one to stop him. Even death couldn't shut her up. And I wouldn't have it any other way.